Steven wants his TV cable fixed at the start of the movie. Inquiring about this, he calls the cable company. He waits for the cable installer until the evening. When nobody shows up, he finally gets in the bathtub. While taking a shower, the cable installer rings the doorbell. When Steven rushes to the door, he sees the cable installer leaving. The cable installer is stopped by him. After 8 hours of waiting, the cable installer complains. Steven is confused. Even though the cable installer had been there for 8 hours, he was watching Steven. The cable installer makes odd gestures as soon as he enters the home, giving Steven the impression that something is wrong with him. He rejects his attempts at conversation and lets the other man's jokes fall flat while being served by an awkward cable guy named Steven Kovacs. As he leaves, Steven asks the cable installer if he knows anything about how his friend paid his cable installer $50 in exchange for access to premium channels. Steven hesitantly offers him the same thing, but the cable guy is offended and informs him that it is prohibited and might incur hefty fines. Before Steven can backtrack, the cable guy says he was just kidding and offers to give away everything in exchange for friendship. The cable technician offers to drive Steven to the satellite of the cable company, but Steven initially declines because he is too busy. Steven politely declines, but the cable guy insists they meet the following day at 6. Before leaving, he gives Steven his preferred customer number, so that Steven can page a match to avoid waiting on hold with the cable company. Steven will present to his team at work the following day along with his boss. Steven's boss rejects his work, giving him anxiety about his presentation and warning him that if something goes wrong, he'll be on his own. That evening, while Steven is in his apartment watching infomercials, the cable installer calls out to him from the street, reminding him of their plans. In the end, he chooses to go with him to the satellite. On the plate, the two are having a heart-to-heart discussion. In a flashback, it is revealed that Chip was raised in a household that was almost completely neglected. His mother was frequently absent, leaving Chip as a young child in front of a loud screen while admonishing him that this would ruin his brain. He became unhealthily obsessed with television and television shows during this time. Steven suggests that the cable guy's lisp, which he is obviously self-conscious about, could be helped by his brother, a speech therapist, if that would be possible. He quickly changes the topic and gives Steven some surprisingly wise advice on something Robin, which he admits is actually from Jerry Springer. He suggests that when Sleepless in Seattle is on cable, Steven invites Robin over to watch it with him since women adore the film and Steven acknowledges that he is aware it is her favorite. He never does this before, but he asks the cable guy his name on the way home. His name is Ernie Douglas, but his friends just refer to him as Chip, so he has moved because no one ever asks him what his name is. The following day, Steven invites Robin, his ex-girlfriend, to a restaurant. He follows Chip's recommendation and asks her to watch Sleepless in Seattle with him. She accepts the movie night because she is touched by his offer and his unexpected insight. As he leaves, it cuts to the television. We are introduced to a cable television channel, which informs him of a significant celebrity court case that is being broadcast on television involving Sam Sweet, who is accused of killing his brother. Later, we see Steven and his friends playing basketball, with one of them getting hurt in the process. Unexpectedly joining them is Chip, who only wants to be on Steven's team. He quickly turns hostile while participating in team play, which annoys everyone. He runs off one of the men's backs and slams the basket with a dunk. The teams break up because they are unable to continue playing, and as Steven leaves, he insults Chip by saying, "You're not my friend," displeased with Chip's actions. Steven finds that Chip has left a lot of messages on his computer, many of which are getting shorter and more erratic over time, when he gets home for his movie night with Robin. Steven says nothing. When Robin shows up, they talk about how much Steven dislikes his boss, including how he has bad hair plugs and looks unattractive. When they finally decide to watch the movie on television, they are met with a static-filled screen. Steven calls Chip's recommended customer pager number. Before he hears a knock at his door, it only rings once, and the person on the other end is holding a severed cable wire. When Chip sees his girlfriend, he displays annoying facial expressions. Even though Steven had just arrived home to hear the messages, he makes a promise to come back the following day if he turns his cable back on. He continues to counsel Steven on Robin before departing. The following night, Chip surprises Steven by taking him to Medieval Times, one of Chip's favorite eateries where they can watch knights participate in fictitious battles. Steven is trying to find a nice way to break up with them over dinner, interspersed with awkward conversations with the waitress. When Steven finally manages to say it, they are abruptly called to the fighting pit. Chip acknowledges that he provided free cable to each knight so that he could send Steven to confront them. Steven wonders if they will stage a fight because both men are armed and armored. However, Chip seems to be taking their upcoming battle very seriously. Steven is knocked around by Chip during their fight until he becomes fatigued and turns on Chip. Despite the uproar from the crowd, Chip keeps attacking Steven and eventually knocks him to the ground. Both men are mounted and made to engage in a duel. Chip cheerfully promises that they will meet again when Steven dismounts to check on Chip before raising Steven's hand in victory. They go back to Steven's residence. Steven initially seems content with his odd friend, but he soon becomes aware that Chip broke into his apartment and put in a big screen TV and loudspeakers in the living room. Steven, who appreciates the gesture, makes it clear that Chip must withdraw everything. Chip concurs but demands that a karaoke party come first. Steven agrees grudgingly. The next evening, Chip throws a huge party, primarily for Steven's most devoted clients. Old men, weirdos, and 2 policemen make up this group. When Steven calls Robin, he discovers that she is out with someone else. Chip approaches Steven as he is upset and comforts him. Even though Steven claims it isn't a big deal, Chip is touched by the thoughtful gift he gives him, a speech therapy tape that his brother recommended would help him with his lisp. At the party, Steven spots a stunning woman, and Chip insists that he talk to her. Then, Chip bumps into Steven's old friend, aggravating the person who already doesn't like him. Chip performs a karaoke song as Steven and the woman start kissing and making out. Before leaving Steven and Heather, the woman, alone, Chip snaps a humorous picture. The following morning, Steven starts cooking an egg for the Chip. She is ecstatic about the previous night, and they eat breakfast together. Steven's confusion is compounded when Chip replies, "It was my treat." When Steven asks for clarification, he seems to be avoiding the question by making vague statements like, "This time me," and "next time you." And finally, he asks what the Chip means. He explains that the woman was a paid prostitute who had been hired by Steven to help him deal with his loss. Chip tries to comfort Steven, but Steven is horrified and ejects him from his apartment. Then, we see Chip dining in an upscale establishment. He has covered his face with a thick fake mustache to disguise himself. On a date with a jerk who is barely paying attention to her, Robin is also present. When the date walks in, Chip, who works as a restroom attendant, beats him to within an inch of his life, leaving the man on the ground. He then scares the date away by telling him to avoid Robin. Later, Chip shows up at Robin's apartment and says Steven has paid for an upgrade to her cable. Chip tells Robin that Steven is his best friend and that he loves her and wants her back after upgrading. Robin, feeling moved, calls Steven to thank him. Although Steven is aware of what happened and what Chip did, he still blames him for the cable upgrade. Chip tells Steven that it was his way of atoning for the prostitute incident when they cross paths on the way home. While acknowledging Chip's good intentions, Steven explains that he no longer wants to be friends with him. The news has Chip in tears. Steven is detained when he arrives at work the following day by the 2 officers who were at the preferred customer party the previous evening. The accusation is receiving stolen property. It turns out that his apartment's television system chip was stolen. Steven tells his attorney about the incident, but the attorney replies that Chip Douglas doesn't work for the cable company. They could have been best friends, but are now their worst enemies, says Larry Tate, who shows up to visit Steven in jail and introduces himself as Chip. When Steven is let out of jail and goes back to work, he finds that a video of him and Robin criticizing their boss has gone viral in their workplace. Shortly after being fired, Steven is followed by Chip's harassment as he leaves for his car. At home, he finds the video was recorded by a hidden camera that was placed beneath his table. Chip is at the door when Steven brings Robin to his parents' house for dinner. Chip shows Steven a copy of the photo he took of him and the prostitute when Steven threatens to call the police. Then Chip tells Steven to relax and have fun. Over dinner, Chip relates the tale from the Medieval Times show, but he switches the character's roles so Steven appears to be a violent lunatic. After dinner, Chip invites everyone to play Poor No Password, an adult version of a popular game show. As the tension builds, Steven snaps and punches Chip in the face. Chip leaves in response, and everyone is furious with Steven. Later, Steven gets in touch with the friend who came up with the bribe idea and who had checked Chip's background because of his peculiar behavior. He learns that all of Chip's names, including Larry Tate, were inspired by legendary television characters. According to reports, Chip was also let go from the cable company for following customers. When Steven gets a call from Chip, Chip seems crazy. When he tells him that he and Robin are going to hang out, Steven becomes alarmed and tells him to avoid her. He quickly makes his way to Robin's home and greets her landlady. She says she overheard Chip and Robin talking about the internet, which made them think they would be at the satellite. In a similar manner to how he did with Steven earlier, Chip explains how it works to Robin at the satellite. However, Robin is turned off by his spooky demeanor, which begins to frighten her. She asks to leave and says she's worried about Steven, which irritates Chip even more. Soon after Steven learns that Robin is restrained, he arrives. A rainstorm starts to fall as Chip and Steven fight in the rain, and Chip intermittently tries to drown him. Chip briefly knocks Steven out while he is still getting some good hits in so that he can reach the top of the satellite's ladder. Steven pursues them and begs Chip to release her. As Chip apologizes to Steven for destroying their friendship, he starts to cry. Chip blames his mother for not paying enough attention to him when he was younger. allowing him to get so out of control and lose touch with reality as police and emergency personnel join them in a helicopter. Chip makes the decision to commit suicide by jumping into the satellite's core as he looks down. In an effort to prevent Chip from jumping, Steven grabs his arm. On the other hand, Chip grinned and released. The verdict in the previous high-profile celebrity murder case is about to be broadcast in the meantime. As the verdict is being read, Chip's body collides with a satellite and cuts the cable while everyone is watching. Despite this, Chip manages to survive the fall, only narrowly missing a spike despite suffering a back injury. Chip is taken out by an emergency helicopter. When Steven again asks Chip's name, he responds, Ricky Ricardo. As the helicopter takes off and Steven and Robin kiss, the pilot inside tells Chip that he is going to make it. Chip queries if he is his buddy. The pilot merely shrugs and says yes he is. After Chip smiles slyly for the camera, the picture goes black. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.